Reddit was founded over 15 years ago, and due to it being a site where anyone can create their own community on just about anything, there was bound to be some controversial subreddits over the years. Today we'll discuss 3 of those, 2 of which have been banned. If you enjoy mysteries, true crime, disappearances, and the occasional conspiracy, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. I also just recently set up a Patreon, so if anyone's interested in supporting the channel and accessing some bonus content, please feel free to check out the link in the description. Huge thank you to anyone who considers this. r/Darknet Markets was a subreddit dedicated to discussing markets on the dark web and products that could be purchased on there. I've never personally tried to access the darknet myself, so I can't speak from personal experience, but I'm sure you've all heard horror stories of things people have found on there. Some people say that just about anything illegal or immoral you can think of can be seen or purchased on there, from drugs to snuff films. One of the more well-known markets was Silk Road, an online black market that was most popular for selling illegal drugs. The site was shut down and the founder was arrested in 2013 and later convicted, but this was by no means the end of the online black market, and to this day many sites still exist on the dark web that sell illegal products. So given some context, it makes complete sense that Darknet Markets was banned from Reddit, as the whole subreddit revolved around discussing illegal activity. If you try to access the community now, you'll be met with a message stating that the subreddit was banned due to a violation of Reddit's policy against transactions involving prohibited goods or services. It was banned in 2018, and I never saw it before that. All that remains now is a few archives, plus people discussing the community elsewhere on Reddit or articles about it. But from what I could find out, it seems that, unsurprisingly, most people were interested in purchasing drugs and using the subreddit to find trustworthy vendors. You can still view the subreddit's rules via Wayback Machine, which provides a few more details on what the subreddit was like. It looks like at one point that there were few rules at all on this subreddit, which isn't really too surprising considering at one point Reddit was all about free speech. But after various controversial subreddits debatably gave rise to radical views, hate speech and illegal activity, the moderators of this subreddit really had to play ball to avoid being banned. The mods had been in contact with Reddit admins, and it seems like they, at least for some time, came to some kind of compromise. In their own words, from an archive of the rules page in July 2017, due to our discussion with the Reddit admins, the way we have approached vendor advertising and interaction in this sub must change. There are no more ads on this sub. We are working on a replacement. Also, if there is an interest check or some thread talking about a drug or substance, a vendor cannot reply with their prices or any hints of direct dealing, such as asking for PMs. A simple vendor name and marketplace is permissible. Do not discuss prices if you are a vendor. Nothing that looks like an ad or conducting a deal is allowed and will result in a ban. Vendor update threads, such as vacation status or supply updates, are prohibited. Please note that giveaways are no longer allowed on the sub. They then went on to distinguish between the types of posts that would be allowed and types that would result in a ban. For example, it would be acceptable to ask, does vendor X or vendor Y have the best Z, but not to ask who has the best Z. It was clear that the mods had been warned in relation to the content that was popping up on the subreddit. Other rules included no hiring hitmen or asking how to commit suicide, and no blackmailing, but you would hope that those rules were there from the off. Of course we know that these changes and new restrictions didn't stop the subreddit getting banned, but I'm not sure whether this was because people just weren't following the new rules, or if Reddit admins just realised that in general the subreddit didn't make the site look great. But it's likely that US authorities requesting the personal information of some of the users probably played a part in the downfall, which started some time before. Though there are still similar but smaller subreddits that exist to this day, such as r/Darknet Market and r/Darknet Markets 4. r/Darknet is a subreddit which has a decent following of 143,000 users, and it has a weekly market thread which is pretty much just full of people asking where they can buy drugs. I'm not really sure how this subreddit's evaded being banned up until now, but who knows, maybe they could be next. r/men's rights is exactly what it sounds like, a subreddit dedicated to discussing men's rights. It lists some of the issues that are discussed, including circumcision, lack of social support, legal discrimination, and selective military service. The core principles of men's rights are not necessarily bad. While sexism has historically affected women more than men, it wouldn't be true to say that men haven't been affected at all. Things are much better now for everyone than they were 50 or 100 years ago, but there are still glaring issues that both women and men face today. The FAQ section on men's rights is a long read. I skimmed through it to get the gist of it, but I didn't read every single word, so don't shoot me if I missed anything here. But from what I gather, someone who agreed with all the points detailed in the FAQ would not be against women or women's rights. Some of the users on there are women, but recognise that there are separate issues that affect men that also need to be addressed. Unlike the other communities discussed in this video, men's rights has not been banned and is still active. And I think the reason for that is because at its core, it isn't, or at least shouldn't be, hateful or discriminatory. Scrolling through the posts on the subreddit, some people are simply just pointing out inequalities or double standards, which obviously isn't a bad thing. But the problem is that men's rights doesn't just attract these kind of people that just want genuine gender equality, it also attracts extremists, who believe that men's rights should be more important than women's rights, who claim that women never even were oppressed, and who even go to lengths of defending abusers against women and rationalising their actions. It's obvious that some users on there don't even really care about men's rights, it's just a retaliation against feminism to them. Some of them claim that women have always been the privileged ones and that men have always been oppressed, and it's views like these that make the subreddit controversial. The views of some of these users are very similar to those of incels, which we'll touch on later. From what I saw, the subreddit is quite a negative place, and many users seem to focus more on bashing women than actually trying to fight inequality between men and women. They often use anecdotes to prove points, which is obviously very unreliable. For example, it's not uncommon to see links to articles about individual women who have said or done something extreme or irrational that some users will extrapolate to the general female population, using it to paint all women with the same brush. There also seems to be users who are angered by any programs which are designed to help women, which obviously isn't helpful to gender equality. They seem to be more focused on criticising these programs for women rather than trying to design similar ones to help men. There have been a couple of specific incidents which have seriously tarnished the reputation of the subreddit. In April 2013, it was almost shut down after users doxed a blogger of feminist issues, even sending death threats to her place of work and school. Which is obviously completely unacceptable regardless, but it actually turned out that they had the wrong person. They ended up doxing someone who had nothing to do with any of this. In December that year, after complaints that the Occidental College online rape report form was vulnerable to abuse because the submitter could remain anonymous, around 400 false accusations were made by men's rights activists from r/mensrights and 4chan against members of the college, feminists, and even fictional people. Which is obviously very damaging for anyone involved. Genuine and true accusations could have been ignored thanks to this, and innocent people could have faced consequences for false accusations, the very thing that these people were claiming to fight against. Fighting false accusations by making false accusations, that'll show them. The problem with this subreddit is that it's just such a mixed bag. There seems to be people on there that genuinely do just want equality between the genders, with some even speaking out against radical views. But it's not hard to see how men who do feel that they've been discriminated against based on gender could easily become radicalised when met with some of the extreme views held by those in the community. For now at least, the subreddit remains open. The big incidents happened a long time ago, so let's just hope that the community has learnt its lesson in relation to doxing and taking extreme action. If anything like that were to ever happen again, I wouldn't be surprised if that would be the end of the community. The final subreddit we're going to discuss relates to suicide, and this section will touch on a kind of meta-discussion of suicide, so feel free to stop watching here if that's something that might trigger you. r/sanctionedsuicide was a subreddit that approached the topic of suicide from a pro-choice perspective. It was banned in March 2018 for posting content that encourages violence. Archives on Wayback Machine, as well as more recent discussions of the subreddit on Reddit, give a basic idea of the type of posts you'd see on there. From what I gather, many users on there had already decided that they were going to commit suicide. Some just wanted to discuss it, others asked for advice on how to go about it, or asked questions such as would their family get a life insurance payout. The rules stated that it was pro-choice, not pro-suicide, so encouraging suicide was not allowed, but most people on there seem to have already made up their minds. So I'm sure you can already see why some users didn't agree with the subreddit, but while the subreddit in itself was controversial, so was the banning of it, with some users claiming that it took away the only place that suicidal people might have had to go and discuss their thoughts and feelings without judgment, and without being given cliché statements such as suicide is not the answer. Some would argue that it wasn't so bad for those people who genuinely had made up their mind already to just have a place where they just didn't feel so alone for the last minutes, hours, or days of their lives. To be honest, it leads into quite an interesting debate in which I'm not exactly sure where I stand. I can completely understand why the subreddit was banned. I mean, theoretically, it could egg people on to commit suicide who might have just been contemplating it and not actually decided. On the other hand, it could have had the opposite effect on other people, realising they're not alone in how they're feeling could have actually helped them. It also leads to some even broader debates involving free speech and whether or not people should have the right to commit suicide. I don't want to digress too much debating these things, but I would be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Regardless of your views on that, there were other problems cropping up in the subreddit. There were an increasing number of men that were posting on there blaming women in general for their suicidal thoughts and claiming that feminism in general had caused them to be like this. These men seem to have migrated from r/incels, a subreddit for mostly straight men who describe themselves as involuntary celibates. The community was full of men who openly hated women, talking about them in a derogatory way and often justifying and encouraging violence against women. It wasn't uncommon to see posts discussing suicide too. It was eventually banned in October 2018. While posts by incels weren't necessarily always well received on sanctioned suicide, they were becoming increasingly common. It's possible that this played a part in the subreddit being banned, though it's interesting how this subreddit was banned before r/incels, so it is possible that people just weren't following the rules of not encouraging violence. Considering there are still subreddits now that serve a very similar purpose, such as r/time2go, there had to have been something that set apart sanctioned suicide from other similar communities, but I'm not exactly sure what it was. The topic of free speech is always relevant when discussing banned and controversial subreddits, and I think it's a pretty complex issue. Most of us agree with free speech to some extent, but at which point do you draw the line? When a community promotes violence, when a community could be classed as offensive and uses derogatory terms, for example, but does not support physical violence, when there's just a community that is an open space for unfiltered discussion, including criticism on sensitive topics. I think free speech is something that when you really break it down, many people, myself included, aren't exactly sure where we would stand on the topic and exactly where we would draw the line. A while back, I even did a couple of videos on censorship and free speech on Reddit where I attempted to stay relatively unbiased when discussing both sides. Generally speaking, I agree with banning a subreddit if it's based around discrimination or harmful illegal activity. But I do feel like, looking back, there has been many subreddits that have been banned simply because they were just controversial, but they weren't necessarily harmful to anyone. Anyway, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you have any experiences with any of the subreddits mentioned in this video, or do you know of any other controversial subreddits? If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday in a new video.